Bandsplainer, the podcast where we explain bands. I'm Olivia Ladd, a music journalist in Nashville, and I'm really curious about retro and cult bands and the history behind their music. Every time I'm out with friends, we end up talking about bands that we love, sharing personal anecdotes and facts, and talking about why we like their music so much. So I decided to record these conversations and create a space where we can go in depth and share with other people who love music. On this show, I pick a band with a cult following and have a guest from the music scene here in Nashville hop on to delve into the history surrounding that band. We go into their discography and give context about not only the music, but also the art, politics, influences, and different forms of media surrounding these artists, in turn giving you a better understanding about their art. I hope this podcast helps someone find their new favorite band or helps someone learn something new about a band they've always loved. You can follow @Bandsplainer on Twitter to keep up with new episodes, and you can always find more episodes on olivialadd.com. Thanks for listening. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bandsplainer, the show where we explain bands. And today we're going to talk about the history and music of Black Flag, one of my favorite punk bands. And today's guest is Zach Prosser, and he's a musician here in Nashville. And you can go ahead and introduce yourself, talk about what you do.
Sure. Hey, I'm Zach Prosser. I'm really glad to be talking about a band that I would be talking about anyway. Yeah, I'm a musician, producer, and songwriter, and all that artsy-fartsy shit. And blah, blah, blah. And I'm just glad to be here to talk about hardcore punk rock.
Talk about punk rock. Nice. That's what we're going to do. If you haven't heard this podcast before, the basic format is for someone who's maybe never heard of this band or never gotten into them, or maybe they just know that one song, you know. So we're going to go into all the weird and wonderful things that you may not know or you may know about this band, but hopefully you'll learn something and get turned on to Black Flag. So they are considered one of the first hardcore punk bands, if not maybe the first to really nail in that genre. So they formed in 1976 and ran until 1986.
Good decade, solid decade of music, which is
to continually improve that much in a decade, because some bands it takes 3 decades to grow that much. Even Radiohead or whatever, doesn't evolve their genre that quickly. So
yeah, Radiohead. Maybe you can learn something from some OC punks.
From the real punks.
For some Los Angeles area punkers.
Yeah, so they were one of the first bands in the SoCal scene in the late 70s when all this proto-punk is happening primarily in New York, and then bands like Melvins and Minutemen and Black Flag are starting this unheard of, unprecedented scene in SoCal, which is kind of what makes them so cool, is they totally just started from nothing. They created this whole new scene and genre.
Yeah, the Minutemen were actually on Greg Ginn, the guitar player and main songwriter for Black Flag, his label SST. They toured together and stuff like that. The Minutemen were really kind of scared of Black Flag audiences, but I'd love to see one of those shows.
Oh, I know.
And our kids are going to get to go back in time by chewing some pill or something, and they're going to get to see all the bands that we want. Yeah, just motherfuckers. But you mentioned different coasts, which I think is kind of cool, because it was really a different East Coast, West Coast. I think, I'm going to say a lot of things on this podcast that are just, there's at least a kernel of truth in here, because I might be confused, but I remember reading some stuff about Black Flag and whatnot, and I think Flea said it. He said, he grew up in the Los Angeles area, and he said, the West Coast has a different disease than the East Coast does.
Yeah.
And it was very different, take on punk and art and stuff.
Yeah, it totally was. Because it started, on the East Coast, it was more this jangly rock, and then it goes into new wave, and a lot of that's influenced by Brit rock and stuff going on at the time. And then, SoCal, I feel it was a lot of, obviously in all of Black Flag's music, but frustration, and they wanted this new type of art, and they incorporated fear and violence and just frustration with the status quo, and the like extravagance of Los Angeles culture when they're living in near poverty, and all of that really like comes to drive like at the end of all the records. Like they were very nuanced in their like political messages. Like it was never like a protest song, it was like an ironic song, and that like some people took it seriously or like whatever. And so they were very good about like maybe not even subliminal, but like ironic or like different ways of delivering this like idea of politics without it being like in your face.
Yeah, I think the number one thing that was not confusing about their message was fuck the police. Yeah, that's a pretty standard current through there.
And like obviously, I don't know. Usually, I'm sure people listening know who Henry Rollins is and how he's like, I mean, he does everything. He's in movies, TVs, he writes,
Brilliant
he's
man.
An activist.
Brilliant man. I've said this and I will say it again, a very good male role model. We don't have very many of them.
Yeah, and that's exactly, we will talk probably more about him once we get to like the breakup stage and all that, but like his like anti-homophobia stance is like really what drove a lot of that music, because he grew up being bullied and saw his friends bullied, and you know, that's kind of like the Kurt Cobain story, whatever, but it's around that time when it wasn't accepted, and he's, like, singing songs, like, or there's, you know, spoken word where he's, like, kill a queer, like, whatever, and he, like, and, you know, so people, like, some people, conservatives that didn't like his music would hear that and think he was, you know, but he was really like giving them a taste of like what they're saying, and it's this ironic delivery.
Very anti-toxic masculinity. You know, you can look at him and you can see him and you can be like, oh, he's a real macho guy, but he actually did this thing that the BBC did in the late 90s. I think it's called like the gender test or something, and it's basically interviews with like famous artists or actors, actresses, and stuff like that, and it kind of fundamentally maps out the gender roles of their brain. Yeah. And when they did his test, he seemed like he scored way more feminine on most of, you know, all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of, he's got one quote that I really, really like that I really take to heart here in 2018, which is, the rest of you guys are fucking this up for me. Do not make being a man, like, do not make me look bad because I'm a man. Like, you're a shithead. That doesn't mean that I am. You use your masculinity in really negative ways and all this kind of stuff. Yeah,
he was very outspoken about that. And he even was, like, went to a military school and, like, was a weightlifter. So he's almost, like, conditioned to be that. And he just, like, became the opposite of it. And I mean, I think that makes for really great art, just breaking out of, like, the roles you're supposed to be in or that are, like, forced on you, because that you can't make art within that. You have to break out of those, like, boundaries, and he really did that. And that, like, just for the punk scene in general, established so much, because, you know, a decade later you have Riot Grrrl and all these things that, like, men weren't allowing those types of people to be seen or heard or make music, and he was one that kind of, like, paved a way for that and opened a door.
Like, being like, you know, this fucking, like, toxic-ass patriarchy shit is just like the cops.
Yeah, you know, and he compared it, he compared it to real-life things, which now in 2018 is like, oh, yeah, we get the whole, like, prison industrial complex and, like, police brutality, like, with gender roles and, like, all these things, but he, like, was connecting those when a lot of people weren't, when people were, like, sustaining that in society. And so he's like, well, you know, the police are, you know, so violent and powerful because of this, like, you know, withstanding patriarchal, like, model for our society. And yeah, he was, like, connecting all those things.
In the punk culture, too.
Yeah. Like, and that's a big thing, is I believe, like, a big problem with really anything is that any subculture will reflect, like, the values of the culture it, like, derives
or
from.
They'll try and break from them, but really they're just doing a mini version. Yeah, you know, like a mini fascist.
And that's what, like, punk, I mean, in some circles still is, but it, like, at that time, because it was so new, it kind of was, like, with that masculinity, and he, like, totally wasn't going to put up with that in his subculture. Like,
one of the things that was cool about Henry Rollins specifically, and Greg Ginn's lyrics, because Greg Ginn, the guitar player, wrote a lot of the lyrics as well. They had a good sense of, like, they kind of blew the lid off the punk archetype, which started in 1977 with, like, black leather jacket, big mohawk, maybe, you know, tight plaid bondage stuff, which is fine, but, like, they kind of they were kind of like a mirror. Like they showed punk like, oh look, you're being a piece of shit.
Oh yeah.
Rather than being like, let's perpetuate this 1977, like kind of image, I guess.
Oh yeah. I mean, he would go on stage in nothing but a pair of shorts, and he would like grind his teeth into the microphone until the show started, and that just right there,
cut
he was
himself
just
up
showing
with glass
like,
and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, crazy stuff in their live show.
Allen Ginsberg said that he looked like a kabuki dancer because he undulated and writhed and
That's
stuff.
crazy. So a big thing, which I guess I have some actual quotes once we get into like the discography. But, like, the coolest thing to me about Black Flag is when you look at these, like, fanzines, which I'm a really big fan of zines. Like, I try to collect cool ones. You know, if they're not too expensive, I'll order them if I find them or whatever. And these original zines that, like, some kid was making in his basement, they're, like, 60 pages long. You know, they would do one every week. Crazy. And I guess a main person who did the zines is really Raymond Pettibon, which is Gin's brother. Yeah, and so he actually designed the Black Flag logo, and, like, that was for their first single, and Nervous Breakdown and all that stuff. They used that imagery, and then that moved in their other album covers and like the whole tattoo thing, and it's, you know, a
honestly,
huge punk image now.
You know, music is kind of like food, where it's kind of one of those things where like maybe you eat with your eyes a little bit. And since they flyered so much, I think one time they said that they never made less than 500 flyers for each show.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. They had 500 flyers for every show, and not to mention these shows were all DIY. Like, they were like, oh, well, we don't like the venues in LA, so we're going to find
playing in
these
boxing matches.
Yeah, crazy places.
Kids playgrounds and stuff like that.
And they would spray paint the symbol, and they had these art campaigns. And, like, with Raymond Pettibon zines, like, they had, like, one of them was called the Creepy Crawl, like, was their art concept, and so they had all this, like, Charles Manson imagery and, like, almost
on
pornographic.
The
yeah, like, and they had, like,
Jesus
you know,
Christ.
like a Superman that was naked, like, with all the genitalia out and things like that. Like, that was an image, and then they would be like, come see Black Flag play. Like, it was shock value, but it was more than that. It was people really questioning, like, the values of this turning point in American culture. Like, they were so ahead of their time.
Yeah.
Like,
you know, Raymond Pettibon, honestly, I think is a real unsung hero of not just the punk movement or, like, Black Flag, but just art in the 1980s. And it was kind of funny because he was a real kind of just chill guy, didn't really, you know, he wasn't very loud or anything, and they were just like, hey Ray, can we get art? Because they loved his art. And he's like, yeah, take this, you know, you can have this. And like, I remember hearing Rollins and Chuck Dukowski, which was like the bass player / manager for the band, and they were like, there was this 2-year stint where the only thing he would give us were naked men. So that's why there's all these like great flyers online and stuff, and just like dudes with their dicks out.
It's so cool. I've gotten to like see like some of that, like an original copy of some of the zines, and like, I don't know, he just did whatever he wanted. Like, there's a lot of great artists at that time, like, but just it was like
unfiltered. It wasn't really taking anything. It wasn't copying anything.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Black Flag is. Like, it always comes back to that. Like, they truly, like, I don't think they had any interest in being like anyone else. Like, they just weren't trying to, like, emulate anyone, and I feel like their inspiration was themselves. And they say that in interviews, like, their songs, like, you know, other than a couple of our songs, like, the message is just what's going on in our heads. Like, it's not, like, some big statement. Like, and so they really just, like, were inspired by themselves and their own, like, ideas and, like,
one of the best things about that band, and one of the things that I think affected the fact that they pushed punk rock to and post-punk so far and created hardcore, was because, like, you know how we were talking about, like, the differences between East Coast and West Coast?
Yeah.
It seems like the East Coast was really focused on new and future stuff, and they wanted to add art to that, and they wanted to push things forward, whereas, like, the West Coast bands had a really good sense of Americana.
Yeah.
The guys in Black Flag were really into, like, Jimi Hendrix and ZZ Top.
Oh, and Grateful Dead. Like, Gid had been his whole life, like, a huge Grateful Dead fan. And so that's, like, when you get into about, like, 1983, when they, like, are releasing, like, Everything Went Black under they couldn't release another band name, but they released that and all these singles while they're waiting to release full-length albums, is like the psychedelia aspect. They pull in kind
Family
of free
Man.
jazz. Yeah. And they pull that in, and it's like kind of funny because they're like, well, Ginn started like smoking pot around that time, but he's always been influenced by that music. You know, it's like Jimi Hendrix was a really big one. They all cited that they all like got into that, and like that's crazy how like they, in a time when that wasn't like contextualized, like pulled this psychedelic like riffs and style of playing and
jazz.
rhythm and and then put it into punk music.
You know,
crazy.
Punk then especially was like so, and it's so funny because it's such an oxymoron, but like punk was so conformist. Like you really listened to punk, you dressed punk, and you did all this, and one of the things that they hated was like, we don't fucking do that. We're going to listen to whatever. We're going to listen to Motorhead and, you know, like Coltrane in the same time in the van, you know. Like,
and I think, at that time it was... Punk originally was this very masculine-oriented, like, response to the whole free love movement in the 70s.
Yeah.
So it's like, Joey
stuff.
Ramone was a Republican. Like, it was a very masculine, like, centered genre. Mm-hmm. And it was, like... Because I remember asking my parents, like, they went to high school in, like, the, I guess, really early 80s. But I'd be like, oh, like, did you have punks at your school? Or, like, did you listen to punk? And they were like, we didn't even, like, buy punk records because it was, like, a whole different lifestyle. Like, he was like, I wouldn't pick up one. My dad like would listen to all, he has good music taste, but he's like, I would have never like picked up a punk record because I was like, you had a mohawk and wore leather and like dropped out of high school and like
everything looks like the Exploited, it was, like, or Chelsea.
So different. And now like on my playlist I'll listen to like, you know, Alice Coltrane, and then the next is like Alice in Chains, and then the next is something else, you know, like, and it's just, I don't know, it's like you don't have to like conform to a culture, and they were really like, fuck that, like, we're gonna do punk on our terms, and
just
punk
like
should
music.
Be more freeform. And
they just
did.
wanted to play music, which is cool, not like fit into some, you know, kind of like fashion thing, you know.
Yeah.
Which is like a big trap of the whole punk rock. Like, you know, the Sex Pistols is literally named after a boutique, you know, like clothing store. And stuff
of
like
anyone,
that.
Like, they don't know, you know, they weren't there for the music. They were a band for not even a
That's
year
why
or whatever. That's
Pill is way better. Public Image Limited is way better than the Sex Pistols. I'm going to say it here. I don't care who I piss off.
I'll say that.
That's
I'm going to piss off a lot of people over the course of this podcast. I'm sure I already have. But yeah, like the Sex Pistols didn't know how to play their instruments. They were a very dysfunctional band. Like, they kind of sucked. Like, Black Flag is... Yeah, they were. And Black Flag is like this like anti-corporate, they were just
anti-cop,
cool. They were just anti-everything. They were
fascism.
Cool.
You know, all these punks were so obsessed with like bringing back like Nazi imagery, and they were fuck that.
And that's and that's like they're very instrumental in just like driving that out of the scene, and like that's, I don't know, that's crazy to me that really is a thing, and like they reclaimed all these punk like, I guess, artifacts from like becoming this, like Nazism and all that stuff was really prevalent.
Skinheads,
like,
all that kind of shit.
And so they would beat up skinheads at their shows. Like Ken Rollins would, you know, kick someone in the teeth if they like said something you didn't like. Like crazy. So I guess we can go kind of into the chronological part, like just kind of go through the albums.
Cool.
So in case you didn't know, I'm sure you may have picked up by now, but Greg Ginn is like, he started the band, he played guitar, and the Chuck Dukowski is actually way more relevant than he's given credit for, I believe. Like, he's a bass player. Engine. But yeah, he's the engine. They said, like, I don't know, they would practice without a bass player, so he kind of came in after they had this, like, guitar style going, and he made his bass like just drive over all of that, and he actually wrote like a ton of the songs even after he quit the band, and like
kind of turned into their manager afterwards.
Yeah,
but he definitely
I can't remember what exact year, but yeah, even after he wasn't in the band, like he was their tour manager, and they still used his songwriting, like stuff he had written in the past. And then the original lineup is Keith Morris was their singer for like their very beginning stuff, like in the late 70s.
I think lineup might be like a I want to say lineup in quotations, because like literally lineup, I mean, they had They had 4 singers before Henry Rollins, and I mean they would, and the drummers. Oh my God, they went through immediately. You know.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, Keith Morris, he did. That's when they started with like "Jealous Again," and then. Man, what was that first EP?
Yeah, like Nervous Breakdown.
Nervous Breakdown.
Yeah, Nervous Breakdown is like, so that's where Keith, like, he's like a cult classic for Nervous Breakdown.
He does have a fantastic voice.
Yeah, so he was on Nervous Breakdown.
Henry Rollins said that he really loved the, one of the things that he loved about the band, because of course, you know, he's just a fan at this point, was that image to the EP where there's just a guy up with his hands up against a corner and another guy with a chair trying to hold him against the wall. And he was like, I felt like that guy with his fists up every day of my life.
Oh yeah. And it's and that's like, once again, with like with Raymond Pettibon and everything, like their art, like just it just reflected that like inner turmoil and like violence that they didn't advocate violence, but like violence to the state, violence to you know, people
and fighting yourself, fighting
others.
Depression, you know.
And that's like, so
Damage.
Depression, so that's actually a great starting point. So Damage came out in 1981 as their technically like
first full-length
record, and it came out on Unicorn Records, which is like a subset of MCA. And actually, like, quick note, before they could put out anything after Damage, there was this big like legal battle, and they were actually put in like an injunction where they couldn't use their own name.
They didn't own their name.
They didn't own Black Flag, so they couldn't
was...
really release anything, but they still made so much music that they ended up releasing very quickly later. But they said Damage was anti-parent, and that's
what MCA said. Yeah, they didn't want to distribute it, and it's really because they were going to lose money distributing it.
Oh yeah, it was totally because the record label was falling in. Like now Universal owns all of that.
And when they released it on tape cassette, they actually put on the front the little thing that they got that said, you know, the reasons that it was anti-parent, which
kind of like stuck it to the record label, and also like.
And if you're a punk, like, wouldn't that be awesome? It's almost like certifiably good to be anti-parent.
Oh yeah, and that's like in the 80s, like it was cooler to like buy a record that had like a you know, explicit label on it or whatever. Like if you were a teen, like you're like, oh yeah. I mean, I remember being a teenager and literally discovering Black Flag and being like, I'm gonna play this so loud and like piss off everyone in the house. Like
the thing about the 80s,
feels good.
The thing about the 80s too that just was so fucking lame is that there was a good chance, especially for OC dwellers, you know, in Los Angeles County and outside, there was a good chance that your parents voted for Nixon or loved Ronald Reagan and all this kind of American...
like, to think that this all happened in the Reagan era, because I feel like I'll think about the Reagan era and then punk separately, you know, but to think, like...
Oh, no, it's tied.
Yeah, it is. Like, you know, you never, I guess, think of it, because I didn't live during then, like, I was born in the 90s.
Don't worry, like, you've got Trump now, so we get to live through Reagan, too.
We're living through part 2, honestly. But it's crazy. It's not just reactionary though, like it's like we gotta do something because like Reagan won't even say the word AIDS on TV while people are dying, and they're like, you know, singing music about
let's make this country great and believe in our police force and all this shit, and they're like, the police are breaking our friends' noses and calling them
I mean that actually happened in 81 when they had recorded Damage. It was either right before or right after. They come back to their apartment and the police had just raided it and just broken all their shit and left it unlocked, so people looted their apartment and that's like all their equipment, and they had built their own PA system, which I guess something we haven't noted is like the DIY ethic, which I guess is really popular around this time, but they really pioneered that. Like they had just the hardest work ethic of like of any
brutally
band.
DIY.
They did everything. They built their own PA system. Like they just bought parts instead of like paying for a PA system or borrowing one or buying speakers or whatever. They literally
Greg Ginn soldered a lot of those PA pieces together. He built his own guitars a lot of the time.
Crazy.
I mean, it was
very DIY
in-house stuff, and they were also poor. You know, there was a huge, like, you always notice a lot of the lyric content has a lot of about American poverty and whatnot, and that's because they were just insanely poor.
Yeah, which, like, when it came to the breakup, like, that's kind of what it was, is they're playing, like, I think in 1984, they played, I have the exact number here, 178
shows in a year. Yeah.
And they were touring like that all the time, though. Even with Damage, when they're in this 3-year injunction, they're playing shows, they're sleeping in cars, sleeping on someone's floor, And that's actually how Henry Rollins got to join the band. So he was really good friends with Ian MacKaye from Fugazi.
And Minor Threat, another one of the greatest hardcore bands in the entire world.
Those could both be their own podcasts. That I probably should do those too.
Those two guys are like the Lennon and McCartney of like the 1980s. Their influence and their abilities cannot be underestimated, or not like. Yeah. You can say tons of stuff about it and it would all be true just because of how much influence they had on the scene and the music and stuff.
They really did. And like Frank gave like Rollins and MacKaye like a cassette, I guess, copy of Damaged. And so Rollins like gets really into them. He's obsessed with them, and when they're playing near his town, he's like, you can sleep on my parents' floor. Mm-hmm. And then they invite him on stage
to sing. I think it's Clocked In.
Yeah, Clocked In. Yep. Yeah, and so Des Cadena was like singing at this point before Rollins because there was a million vocalists, and he was like, "Well, I want to switch to guitar. Let's just try out this dude." Blew out his voice.
He was getting really bad like fissures
because he had no like formal training, so he was just like exhausting himself with these like loud, crazy performances. And he like Rollins like thought it was just for fun, didn't really know it was an audition, and then they invited him to come into their like practice space or studio or wherever they were practicing for tour, and they were like, yeah, like we want you to sing. Like he just had that whole persona. I don't know how you could not want him to be in your band if that situation
so much about. Energy. He loves the music. He knows the music. He wants to do good. One of the best things about Henry Rollins is being a very blue collar worker. He's working at Haagen-Dazs at this moment. He's a manager at Haagen-Dazs. So he gets to like quit
his job there and like join this band.
But he's a workhorse. He's a hard worker, and like that's one of the things that they loved about him is that he was a hard worker and he would do anything to make the ship move, you know. But he calls Ian MacKaye, and then he's straight up like, I think that I'm auditioning for Black Flag. And he's like, Ian's like, you got to do it, man. This is something that's very important. And he goes, well, what if I get it? What am I going to do? And he goes, you definitely have to do it then.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, quit your job, do whatever, you know.
And he did. He did what he had to do, and he worked his ass off. They all did. Just, their work ethic, because DIY has such a different meaning today, but then it was truly, like, them living in squalor, like traveling in a van, like sleeping wherever they could, and just making their own
when Henry Rollins
making their way.
When he joins the band, he eventually starts living in a shed behind the Gins house because he didn't have anywhere to live, and they were like, well, we have a shed.
Because he had to move all the way to California. He just dropped everything and was like, okay.
He was living in Arlington, Virginia, which was right next to the DC. Of course, that's where DC hardcore is kind of where Minor Threat comes from and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because he was friends with that like scene at the
Bad
time.
Brains, all that.
Yeah, and he was a member of SOA, and he left them to join Black Flag. And then that same year, they toured with Minutemen in Europe, and this is when Rollins starts writing Get in the Van, which is his memoir, which I have not read. I've read excerpts.
It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it's just his diaries.
Yeah, so it's just like a tour diary, and he has these crazy... he's so insightful, like his spoken word and stuff, but he has these crazy quotes about just all the stuff happening on tour, but that's like where it began, like just being in Europe.
Well, one of the cool things about Henry is he falls in love with an author named Henry Miller, who's really big, like Tropic of Cancer, Tropic of Capricorn, which are these really brutally like almost like sexual kind of like bros, you know, kind of thing, like Naked Lunch or something. So Henry immediately is like, well, what can I do as an artist? Because I can't play any instruments or anything like that. So he immediately is like, I just need to write. I need to be a better writer. So, you know, he starts keeping that diary and whatnot. And he just really progresses as a poet and as a writer, just period.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff he wrote in his tour diary turned into spoken word pieces that he either like would perform on stage before a song, or, you know, there's like videos that some punk took of him doing it in a living room, or like when he after the band broke up in the Rollins band and his own projects released. But it all started there, like in 1981. So he's been developing this poetry, this writing since then. And then Chuck Biscuits leaves to kind of, I guess, join start.
He was the drummer, so they lose Robo because they go on a tour, and Robo is not technical. I don't know if it. he's not technically an American citizen or something like that, and he gets detained when they're trying to come back from London.
Yeah.
And literally that was just it for Robo. He finally came back to America, but he was like not interested in touring and all this kind of stuff.
I feel that, and that's a lot of this, like, they go in and out of members like crazy.
Yep.
And so
drummers and bass players, they just
which I feel is hard. There's I feel like a lot of bands that are so influential and stuff, they kind of cycled in and out of these people because you have these core members, and if you can't really keep up with their idea.
Well, you couldn't keep up with Ginn. He was changing. I mean, I think Rollins one time said that, like, hey, maybe we should slow down.
Yeah, so people can, like, not have to predict what we're doing next, and
or
they
like
can enjoy
up.
it, because that's kind of like when you see them live, like, we get into, really 1984 is like the next big year for them, so they release My War, Slip It In, and Family Man, and My War is like, we can go into that in a second, but literally, like, created sludge metal, like, amazing album, one of my
stoner
favorite
metal.
albums.
I mean, literally,
and,
My War is probably, like, that and the fucking White Album is literally probably my favorite records.
No, My War is literally,
time.
Like, that's I think that's probably the first punk record I heard, because I remember, like, where I grew up has a very small scene, but, like, the people I was friends with, like, gave me, like, that, and I remember just, like, listening to that, and I never heard a sound like that, and, like, those people hadn't either in that time, and, like, so what's funny is, like, they released the Live 84 record that year as well later, but so when they're playing these 178 shows, so people had heard Damaged, and so they're like, they want this upbeat thing, and then when they get there, they're playing some old songs, but then they're also playing these weird sludge metal songs.
Heavy, slow, Black Sabbath and
like Nothing Left Inside off of My War to me is like the sludgiest track, and the way it starts, and it's just this drag and drop of like adrenaline, and then he just comes in, like, I think it was a quote from a roadie or maybe a critic or something that said, like, a cobra, like, just snaps
pulls
in
back and then goes down.
And it just, like, and there's a moment in every Black Flag song where it's, like, it's just dragged out, it's building up, and then it just hits you harder than you expect it to. It's, like, more than there's just so much passion behind that. And so people would see them live and they would get upset because they're playing something that's kind of like psychedelic and jazzy. It's still incredibly punk, but so like at that point Ginn would like play some of the slower stuff just to like piss off the audience.
Well,
and like if they got too rowdy, like I can't remember exact song, but there's a video on YouTube, and like the crowd was getting so rowdy, so he just plays like a really boring, like, you know, psychedelic, like he just draws out one of their songs to be 20 minutes, and people start leaving the show, and then they have a great audience because all the like punk, you know, dumb punks left. And so he like the fans couldn't keep up with them, like they were so ahead of their time.
You know, it seems like on Damaged there is a track called Damage 2. It's real slow and real heavy, and it seems like after 1982 1983 they start opening the shows with that. And it's almost like a litmus test. Like, are you going to dig on what's about to happen, or are you just here to, like, smash people's faces in and just release this, like, whatever aggression you have, you know?
Yeah, and that's, like, punk definitely was a space for, like, if you grew up in the suburbs or you grew up poor and, like, you didn't have the self-expression, you could come and just, like, beat the shit out of everyone in a pit. Yeah, and, like, that still feels good. I love going to, like, a good punk show and, like, getting in there. But, like, some people were just, you know, these skinheads or, like, just dumb
using
jocks.
It as violence.
Yeah, just came in and did violence. And, like, Henry Rollins, I don't have the exact quote. I wish I wrote it down. But he's like, I don't condone actual violence. Like, I love the idea of killing people, but that's why I write about it. He's like, I have a microphone and a typewriter, not a gun. Like, and so people would come to shows and be violent, and he would kick them out, or like, you know, people would beat those people up till they left the show. And like, it was just a very no tolerance for that kind of shit. Like, and they really, I don't know, until you get into Riot Grrrl and all that stuff, it's still almost not safe for a lot of people to go to shows. But like, they didn't put up with that. Like, they, you know, so it was their shows like around this time, around the time My War is released, and they record Slip It In during a break while they're touring. So this is really the first half of 84. Around this time, they're getting this rep from, obviously they have this whole anti-police thing going, but they're like, you know, people's parents think they're like a violent band, and they're, you know, like all these things, but it's really because the police would come and create violence at their shows. The police would see that they would pick up a flyer, come, like, the Black Flag show would be halfway through, the police would come in and be the ones hurting people.
Bashing people's heads
they would literally,
clubs.
Literally would bring clubs into an audience where a band is playing and hit people, hurt people, and they got away with that. And then they go and spread this rhetoric, like, this, like, narrative that, like, Black Flag is, like, violent, and when the opposition is what's creating the violence there, when they're speaking out against, like, police brutality, and then it happens at their shows, and it's, like, a sick irony that people get to see it firsthand.
Well, the police don't get it. They see this energy going off, and the only thing that they fundamentally understand is either people are being violent or not being violent, so they kind of fight fire with fire. And, it's like the cops just don't get aesthetic, and they don't get art. Because it's not...
It's so black and white to them, and especially during this time in America, it's like, I'm sure any parent would maybe be concerned if they pick up a copy of My War and listen to it, but like...
Or just the image of Slip It In with the nun.
Yeah, like a nun and a record called Slip It In. Like, that's... I get it, but like, art is so... It's just, you can't take that at face value. That's like a lot of their songs, like, white minority. So, like,
Which is on Jealous Again, I believe.
Yeah, so this is one of their very first ones when they actually had a Puerto Rican frontman singing, like, we're gonna be a white... Yeah.
Ron Reyes, right?
And so, like, they're saying we're gonna be a white minority, like, we're gonna fill inferiority. So they're basically talking about, like, like... white pride. Like, it's an ironic song almost from the point of view of someone who's like afraid of losing their white privilege. Like, it's like, one day we're gonna be the minority, how terrible is that? And people thought they were being serious, and they were like, our singer isn't even white. Like, this song is supposed to be like kind of a fuck you, like, you're really scared of being a minority. White patriarchy,
tear that shit down.
And it's like, they were, I don't know, I feel like that's something that people still have to unlearn today. Like, why are you so afraid of being a minority? Because of the way you treat minorities.
Well, like, this line is the best. Gonna be a white minority, you don't believe there's a possibility. Well, just wait and see. We're gonna be the white minority.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's not like, oh, God. It's like, as a white culture, we need to understand that we can't just like hammer down at other ethnicities or anything within America, because it's not going to be like this. We can't use this like white pride as a hammer, It's
exactly.
Disgusting, what
exactly.
I mean?
And so they're like calling that out, and just once again, like, ahead of their time. So and then you get into Slip It In. Slip It In, actually, so one of my favorite songs on Slip It In is My Ghetto.
Ooh, yeah.
And so that not only has a great message, My Ghetto, but so this song to me is like literally like the first power violence song. Like, so before hardcore is even established as a genre, they're like, what can we do to advance it? And like, so, that's the cool thing about Black Flag is like, every song is great, but there's like one or two songs on each album that like totally have a different sound than the rest of the album a bit. Like, kind of like Nothing Left Inside is just so like sludgy. Like, this one is so like power violence. Like, you get this like I don't know, like rhythm or
I mean, it's like proto-grind.
Yeah.
Grindcore in a way.
Yeah, and you just get that, and no one's ever heard that. And that's one of the ones at the shows that makes people just go crazy. Like, people are just... I don't know. If you... obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you're a music fan. When you're, like, in that moment and you hear a song that just makes you want to just either smash something or cry or dance or, like, whatever. And that's, like, one of those songs, like, if I'm home alone and I hear it, I just, like... and like headbanging and like I don't know, it just makes you go crazy. There's something in it that just it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy deep, what music can make you do. Yeah,
deep energy. What is it? Ravi Shankar said, music it can be God and music can be the devil too. You know, so like that energy can fill you with like, and I think that was the disconnect between their fans and stuff, was like a lot of young kids were just kind of using this as like a fundamental fuel to aggression. But for them, it's just an exercise. It's like wringing out the aggression in a safe, controlled...
like Roland's, a quote he said, like, around this time is, like, rage is something that can be very soulful. Mm-hmm. So he takes rage and he makes it into art instead of just, like, violence. Like, rage is not violence. Rage is this feeling that can lead to revolution, to whatever, and that's like what begins it all, and that's what's behind their music. And they did have a big disconnect with their fans. Like, obviously they toured all the time and relied on them, but a lot of their fans didn't really get what they were about. Really, initially, I'm sure people caught on, they released 3 full albums and a live album this year, but they did have this disconnect where they weren't condoning violence, and violence was happening, and I feel like a lot of bands have that. People are gonna interpret art however they want to, and half of art is the interpretation, but to me they had a pretty clear message of what they were about, this anti-conformity thing.
I think Henry Rollins one time said, I wish someone would touch me rather, I wish someone would touch me that wasn't either trying to kill me or congratulate me. There was only that big difference. Either the music made you insane and aggressive, or you just thought it was just the most amazing art form.
Yeah. And that's kind of exactly what it was. And that's how a lot of art is just interpreted in general. People just want it to be so black or white. But, I mean, obviously there are people that get it, people that are reading the zines and that, whatever they say, the 2% of people that listen to, more music than the radio and all that stuff. They got it. And so that's by the end of the year they released this live album, and you can see that they've changed a little bit into a softer, a blues influence is even on their live record. And we talked about the kind of free jazz style of guitar playing and stuff. So people kind of see in just a year they go from Damage, which is just a straight up dirty, gritty,
hardcore,
not the best recording,
record.
Just hardcore, and then they go to kind of grunge, stoner metal, then they kind of get jazzy, bluesy, but it's all under the realm of punk. They're still an original punk band making just the best punk rock ever. So it's cool that they incorporate this without ever compromising a sound, even though the sound does change.
One of the things that was really important to the band also in 1984, and especially on that 1984 live album, and then subsequently on another live album they did called What's the 10 and a Half, which is their last recordings. One of the best things about it is they get Kira Rossler, which is fundamentally one of the best musicians in the band. She's an amazing bass player.
She
understands
the whole
rhythm.
Dynamic. She really does when she comes into the band, and that's a pivotal time she came in during 84 when
it allowed Ginn to go more into art, because he was playing with a lot of people that couldn't play very well. You know? So having her, Kira, and then I think his name was Anthony Martinez, who was the drummer that they played with at that time. They were so good at rhythm, and they understood music in a fundamental level and on a music theory level. It allowed Ginn to get more into his kind of musical experimentation, which allowed Henry to get into his spoken word art form. So it's everybody started to grow at that time.
Yeah, and it's, that's a lot of other, I guess, bands that started that way. But she comes into the band and changes the dynamic, playing bass, and that's a big thing. That's kind of going back to the Sex Pistols. Sid Vicious didn't even know how to play bass, and then
which is
Black
so
Flag,
romantic, but it don't make
sucks,
good for
it
good
doesn't,
art.
And so they're actually in a punk band, but they're all artists, so they're soft, sensitive artists.
Playing as good as they can, as well as they can. They're going deep into it,
And it's just, crazy. It's, I don't know. So they also put out, Family Man that year, and she's on that record.
Half spoken word, half instrumental.
So this is, a really great, I don't know, if you're, a baby punk, and you're, just getting into all that music, this is,
or if you're an artsy-fartsy kid at a university, and you want to break off of the standard artsy-fartsy bullshit, you can go into this, and you can see the fundamental American blue-collar thought process.
And, you see Armageddon Man, just songs like that. Oh, my God. Changed my life. I never heard spoken word, and Black Flag was one of the first. Black Flag and Patti Smith for me, I got so into it. I'm still really into it, and have books. And
my mom,
crazy.
I remember one of the ways that I talked to her, because she was kind of she was an artist and stuff, and she kind of fundamentally didn't really see a lot of positive aspects of punk music, because she kind of just saw it as the UK subs kind of exploited the kind of lame shit. Not to say that's lame, but it's a very one-sided thing. And I remember being like, listening to this album specifically and being like, Mom, this is just like the Yoko records that you would let me listen to. Like, I saw Henry as being this like modern male equivalent to Yoko in the early 70s. He totally is.
That's like a really great comparison. And I don't know, it's crazy just to hear, I mean, all these bands I've done a podcast on are like obviously some of my favorite bands. So it's like I went from a background of like literally growing up on like Christian and country music and nothing else.
Yeah, Garth Brooks maybe?
Oh yeah. And like all that, which I work in country. I love country music, but like I just never heard anything like this. And I can imagine that's what teens during that time who didn't have hardcore music like put on this record and like, it blows your mind.
And the radio at this point is like the Eagles and
it's
shit
the worst.
like that.
Like I can't imagine having to like listen to popular music at that time.
And it's like the best thing you have on the radio is like the fucking Cars or something like,
and
which is fine.
Suck, like.
Oh no, Cars
I'm not
are cool.
really a big fan.
But it's definitely not music that pushes the bounds of art.
And this pushes, it doesn't only push the bounds of punk, it doesn't only push the boundaries of hardcore, it pushes the boundaries of what is poetry and what is
live.
art.
What is live music?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, and live music especially, like the fact that they toured so much, DIY touring, like they revolutionized that. Like that's nowadays, living in Nashville, one of my friends goes on tour every week, and so it's like it's a routine at this point. Not that it's easy, but you have like your van and you like book your shows, whatever, and they were just they didn't have a precedent. They didn't have like a
there wasn't now there is a protocol for unknown bands. Back then there was no protocol. You were either a giant band or nobody knew who the fuck you were. And it was kind of one of these things where like they're calling as many people as they can. They're calling YMCAs to see if they can play there. Yeah. And the cool thing is, since it's such a zeitgeist of the punk movement and such a zeitgeist of just the art movement, there's fucking 3,000 people showing up to a library, or something like that to see them play, which is just
it's just crazy because even SST or like what Chuck doing like their tour managing, like none of these people know what they're just making it up as they go. So they're like, they literally played in everywhere from living rooms and basements to libraries and gyms
sleeping
and streets
in their clothes with spit all over them, not getting to shower, not hardly eating.
Yeah.
I mean, these people are hard-working motherfuckers that are trying to make shit happen.
And that's true hardcore. Like, they live this lifestyle that I don't see how they could produce anything but this hardcore music. Because they're living hardcore. Yeah. Like, they are living...
It's just none of that slacker escapism bullshit. It's not like...
Touring is not, like, an easy, fun thing. Yeah. Like, I mean, like... People do it now, and I'm sure it's, like, a bit easier or whatever, but, like, for them, it's like, it's their job and their whole life, and they have no money, and so they just are it's so dedicated to it.
Imagine, like, now, a lot of music is fundamentalized by luxurious leisure time. Imagine if you were to imagine if Henry Rollins and Greg Ginn walked in, saw your band set, and heard a song about fucking eating pizza. Yeah. Would spit in your fucking face. Because it's just not... It's stay home.
And I love stuff like that, like songs that are about, I don't know, drinking beer, like...
It's
even
got
have
its
like
place.
Mac DeMarco and stuff like that, and then you have weirder stuff that's come from that. That's like slacker anthems. That's like about whatever. But their music was about getting shit done and like what they were doing at the time. Like, that's
and fighting against fascist oppression within the American construct.
And they're being so active about it. And I feel like it's a lot of bands today. I don't want to say a lot. There are bands today, local or bigger, that are like, which I guess there's not a lot of ways to do it, but they'll release something on Facebook if something happens that's like, we stand with the transgender community, whatever. But like Black Flag, every day that they woke up, they were producing art that challenged that. And they were literally physically protecting people at their shows that were outcast or like, fighting people that were, racist or homophobic or whatever, and like fascist, and so like every song they put out is like even Family Man, which is the last one they put out in '84, is like they're talking about just like the family man who's complacent in politics. I
love that. Family man.
It's
family man.
And so it's just like family man. And he's like, my favorite lyric is, I want to crucify you to your front door with the nails from your own well-stocked garage, family man. Like, it's just like, why sit around and be complacent? Like, you know, they'd rather live dirt poor and like be fighting like.
Well, also the aspect of like, you know, you think, oh, well, you know, what a family man who does, you know, like, oh, there's all these bullshit family values that they're getting from the government or from media. Yeah. But, you know, he's the same guy that's like hitting his wife when he gets too drunk and shit like that, or mistreating his children. So they were like, fuck that. Like, I'm not interested in any of that Americanism. Which
we're like totally coming back into in the Trump administration and,
patriarchal,
and it's like this whole like fight of like, oh, American values, and it's like, what are American values? Mm-hmm. Like they suck. Like they're not, you know, American values is a two-sided, very hypocritical thing that if you have if you look good on the outside, you're a good citizen, but you're still voting for people you're voting against welfare, and you're voting against things that help people and immigration and very basic like human decency
rights
that everyone should have.
I'm having a great time drinking beer and fundamentally like pushing for or perpetuating the patriarchal society.
Which is like the song, one of their first is so TV Party.
TV Party.
And so they're literally just making fun of like, in quotations, normies. Like they're like, oh, like we have nothing better to do than watch TV and drink
a couple of brews. Yeah, and they're like, I love ESPN. Yeah, I love this.
Which is like, I like watching Netflix, whatever, but it's like there's really people, like I think about that, like it's hard, you can't force creativity. There's days I come home and can't like write or absolutely. Whatever, but there's people that don't even try. There's people that come home every day after work and like drink 2 beers and watch their show and go to bed.
Well, that's their priority.
Like,
you know, there's all this shit
like what
going
they do.
down.
That's their hobby.
There's all this shit going down. You know, the 1980s were a tumultuous time in American history, and there was a lot of, you know, it's kind of like the second 60s. There's a lot of denying of rights and whatnot. And like to think that you're just, the only thing you're worried about, it's like a modern thing to me. Like you're worried about fucking microbrews, but like I have to worry about like my teacher has a gun that could shoot my kids or something like that. You know, like I just want a Monster Energy drink and not worry about all the school shootings or some bullshit like that. You know, like that's your leisure time. You know, I don't know. It's like they're,
and it is that now. Like once again, we are going through that again, and it's, I don't know, in 2018, I feel like we have to wake up every day and be like, is what I'm doing good or bad for, you know, on a very basic level, mm-hmm. is what I'm doing good or bad, like, in a ripple effect to the political climate we're in, and, like, and Black Flag did that. Every day they woke up and they were like, okay, so I see a rise of fascism in the punk scene, mm-hmm. and I see these, you know, Reagan-era values, and, like, we're going to make art that challenges it, we're going to challenge it with physical performance, with words, with writing, and they did that.
Hard work, discipline, and
really,
thought.
Yeah, they put in, and a lot of it is discipline too, because, you know, every band has ambition, but like they, I don't know, who puts out 4 records in a year like that, and also playing 178 shows while recording records, like crazy.
Someone that gives a shit. That's who does it.
And they did, and that's, I don't know, punk needed that at the time, and like, it's just, I don't know, it's cool. So now it's 1985. The band plays about the same amount of shows that year, and they put out Loose Nut. And to me, Loose Nut is like kind of getting back to like the polished kind of hardcore.
I do have to say, this album sounds bizarre.
It's a very strange album.
Out in there, and I just mean like the mixing and mastering of it. It sticks out. It's got this 80s sheen that is just so, like, the songs are amazing and I love the record, but it really, you can tell that they're like kind of just changing completely. You know, Greg starts playing with this band called Gone, which tours with Black Flag, and it's all instrumental and it's jazz, really. Yeah. You know? So you're really starting to see like a split in the band as it happens, and this album being like such a weirdo kind of marks that turn.
And that's like, so they break up in 86, but this is like kind of the time where that quote earlier where Rollins is like, maybe we should just like, slow down a little bit, whatever. And so it's kind of, after Loose Nut, you have In My Head, which came out the same year.
I do want to say one more thing about Loose Nut. Loose Nut is where they make their break with Ray Pettibon, the guy that makes, Greg's brother, because they used this image, which is a self-portrait of actually Ray on the cover with two women on both sides. And it's just kind of a ridiculous, almost like cabaret-esque image.
It's
very
such
American,
a contrast,
1950s
to what
kind of
they've
thing.
done before.
And they took it without letting him know. And the thing about Ray, because they weren't paying Ray for his artwork, but he wanted to, as any artist does, he wants to put out what he wants to put out. And this was kind of for him. So when he did it, he got really pissed off, and he kind of stopped making images for the band at this point.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know, their, like, iconography is, like, such a big part of it. They create, the Black Flag, like, whatever. So that's, I actually didn't know that fact. That's really crazy. But yeah, there's a big contrast here in sound and image of what they've been doing before. They don't have,
and you got a song like Annihilate This Week, which is like one of the heaviest songs of the 1980s.
And that's, I really like, I read some like excerpts from the zines, and it's kind of funny, like as a music journalist, so a lot of, I feel like it's lazy music journalism to just be like, this new band sounds like this band mixed with this band. Like, but you kind of have to do that a little bit to give context. Like nowadays, if I pick up a local band to write about, I'm going to have to be like, they have this kind of sound.
Pepsi tastes just like Coca-Cola.
Yeah. And, like I get that when an editor makes you do that, or you kind of have to do that to contextualize, but sometimes people do that without any other further description, and that's not description.
It's a consumerist, fundamental, like,
it is.
Like, what would you say? Like, it's literally like a consumerist point of interest, like a point of view kind of thing.
So it's like, if you like this band, you'll like this band. But so these zines, because there wasn't a lot of hardcore, when they're writing about the music, it's the craziest like music journalism, because they have nothing to compare it to. And that's just, I don't know, they start describing things as like heavy, loud, and they're having to come up with words or assign words that haven't been assigned to music before. And like, this is one, this is from Ripper edition 6. So Tim Tunica, I guess, I don't know this guy, but he wrote this. Yeah, and just like the way they describe it, powerful sounds, like, it's like they don't have language to describe what they're hearing. So you've never heard, they say, wild, squealing, crunching guitar sounds combined with skull-crushing drum beats. Like, no one's ever heard these words to describe music. So punk, like the whole punk zine era, which could be, I feel like I could like teach a college class on that. Like, it's such a big thing of interest for me, but it just like, just like changed music writing also. So like Black Flag, by pushing the limits of their art, like, are pushing limits of other genres of art, of music journalism, to where it's not boring reporting like, oh, I'm going to interview the Beatles. It's like, let's talk about like the word skull crushing. Like, I love that. Like, they're just like assigning new meaning to language, and to language that describes music. And that's like revolutionary, because then you get into the 90s and you have, I don't know, it's just cool. It's a cool time for music journalism. It's very much shifting then.
Well, what's that old journalism kind of thing when it comes to like music PR? It's like, well, your band sounds great, but I need something to write about.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like, I need a paragraph, and I like you, but like, you really only have I've only got 2 sentences.
And the people making these zines are like 17 years old, like like I said, like making them, and they're having to hand copy and like Xerox and all this stuff. And I feel like that's kind of similar to how you kind of have to get started as a music journalist. Like, I didn't know what I was doing, and I made little zines and like Tumblr posts where I would review old records or whatever. And like, it's just cool. It's just cool that they like pushed art not only in their realm, but they changed journalism.
If there's too much infrastructure and it's too easy to do what you want to do, then that means it's not worth the time.
Oh, yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, no, and I feel like maybe not learn that the hard way, but it's just hard to, like, pave that with any type of art. But music writing, if you want to do good music writing, is, like, very much. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Yeah.
Anything that isn't does not matter.
Yeah, true. Honestly, if it's easy, it's, not worth doing. Like, that's not art. Art is not easy. It's painful sometimes, and it's whatever, like, whether you're making music or poetry or whatever kind of writing you're doing. Yeah, so, I don't know. I think that's a really cool thing. I just love looking at old zines about several bands, but Black Flag is in, all these crazy zines, and, like, it's just cool that they describe them without context of a genre, because now it's just, it's so easy to be like, well, they're a hardcore band, and they sound like this other hardcore band. Yeah. They didn't have that. So we're kind of getting to the end of an era, end of the band. They released In My Head in 1985, right after Loose Nut. And I feel like this is one of the albums I haven't given a ton of listens to. Like, Loose Nut is so bizarre. I feel like I've listened to that one a good bit. Obviously, like, My War and Slip It In are, like, my favorites. But, so this one's cool, but it's, like...
In My Head is a really good kind of almost take off of, like, raw power, Iggy and the Stooges kind of idea. Paralyzed, which it starts the album, is a really great, interesting look at like the way the song is structured, because it sounds like freeform jazz, and then out of nowhere you'll get like this poppy kind of interjection before the chorus, and then it goes straight into like power hardcore. Yeah. So it's kind of showing off like their abilities to mix all these, like, it's almost like they're creating things with their other records, and this record specifically is almost like them being like, you think that was some shit, watch how we fit a million different genres in one fucking song. Yeah,
and that's really cool, because they're also at a point where it's kind of a culmination of all the records before, and it really is, because
it shows
you get
off their
that,
musicianship, too.
Yeah, it does, and they've improved as musicians so much over the decades, so you get like the jazz, psychedelic, even blues, sludge metal, grunge, all these genres that they've helped pioneer, and then they put it all into, you can have three kind of genres influencing one song here. And then once again, there's some like spoken word. Yeah.
Yeah, real buffet of different kind of styles and whatnot. And this is a really good, this is like their last official, like real recording as a band. So
their last release is Who's Got the 10.5, and it's a live record. And
amazingly done too. Like this album sounds, there's 1984, which the live 1984 is almost kind of like showing you how insane their live shows are.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It just showcases how like neurotic their music can sound almost.
And like, jagged and scary and loud. But this album really shows how good of a live band they are, and their musicianship. I mean, it just sounds
amazing. Which is what gave
amazing.
them success. Like, they didn't have mainstream success by any means, but they literally banked off of their live shows. Like, that's why people loved them. They would go see them, and they would tour through one town several times in 1 year, because they just kept going and going and going. And like this is a really,
there's a really good version of, so that Slip It In and Gimme 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 is absolutely fantastic. It's got that weird jam thing in it. Oh, and they've also got that jam that you were kind of talking about earlier. But there is like, these songs are just like some of the best versions of them. Honestly.
Yeah, and that's what I'm a big advocate of live albums. Like, I love a good live album, even if it, if it's Bob Dylan, Black Flag, whoever. But like, this one is like, I love live albums because it encapsulates like really the meaning behind the lyrics and music, because you get that feeling, like that like goosebump feeling of like the passion of being there when it's happening live. So this is like a really fantastic record, but sadly, in the exact date is June 27, 1986, they had their final show in Detroit, and this came about because Ginn like calls Rollins on the phone when they're like on a tour break, and he's just like, I'm quitting the band, and Rollins is like,
well, you are the band.
Like, it's your band. He's like, that's what I'm saying, like, Black Flag is not a band. So they have their final show,
and it's over in a phone call.
In one phone call, they like kill this prolific band. And I don't know, in some ways maybe that's good because they, were influential and they have this perfect body of work, like in my opinion, like it stands on its own. But I also like wish,
I don't know any band that can do almost 10 years and it be a solid 10 years.
And that's the thing, because a lot of bands, even ones I've done on this podcast, like have been a band for so long and like they have some questionable stuff in there, but like Black Flag, like I just love everything they've done. Like, I mean, this was my first punk band. Like, all the things we've talked about, it's so much. So, it's kind of sad. And they had this weird reunion thing in 2013.
It's not a real reunion. It's like just Ginn and then like some other people.
With, these people that he had recruited for like a touring, basically, version of Black Flag.
Which Chuck Dowski or whatever, he's got his own version called Flag. So like...
And that's actually a point I forgot to bring up. So his daughter... So Chuck Dowski's daughter is a poet now, and she's actually one of my like favorite Twitter accounts. But she did this thread a couple months ago about her dad... not really getting like money or royalties for their music because he wrote like one of her tweets here. It's Myra Gonzalez. She says, "My dad wrote a majority of the songs for Black Flag. He gets 0 royalties because they were too punk for agents and contracts. And as a result, one asshole gets all the money and all the former members struggle to stay above the poverty line." And I think it's cool. She has a whole thread here, but it's like I don't know. I struggle with that. Like I didn't get paid for my writing, which it's like natural. Like I was 18, whatever. But the first 2 years I wrote, I never got paid for anything. And that's how it's supposed to be. But it's also like, it's not cool to like not get credit for your work.
And especially if
it's not punk at all. Like,
and especially if your work is like straight up in Tony Hawk Pro Skaters. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, wait a minute,
and at the time,
it's $100,000.
And I guess at the time they weren't thinking ahead, but now, now his work is like, commercially successful, and he doesn't get money, and their family doesn't get money, and she, he has kids, and all the other former members that were on the record, and that's a problem. Like, I know when like I have a like background in country music, and you go to like Country Music Hall of Fame, and a lot of these exhibits are like, well, this guy played guitar on every record ever, but he didn't, he died poor. Like, so that's a point to make, maybe a lesson to take from Black Flag. Like, never be too punk to ask for money, because
or at least get
or at least get credit or contracts, or like get things in writing. Is really important. Like,
they were really casualties of that like immediacy of art. They just were young and just wanted to make art.
Exactly. So you don't think about like
the
a legal structure. Where your music could go, which
because
it's like
them,
genuine.
That was like selling out. To think about things like that, they were very anti that kind of...
it's just crazy, because now, Henry Rollins, which, I mean, he deserves it, but also, these other people aren't getting the money. And,
well, I mean, Henry Rollins doesn't get any Black Flag money. But, like, he's definitely, like... he is able to get work from his work and time as Black Flag.
And so a lot of other people don't have that, like, I guess, fame from it. Like, Chuck is, like, to me, just such an underrated member. Like, I just love, like, especially the songs he wrote are some of my favorites. And, so that's pretty crazy. And so at this point in time, like, just in context of the scene, you have, like, all these new bands cropping up, and this all kind of leads to, 4 years later, we're in the 90s, and punk is a whole new monster, which I'm sure we'll get into other podcasts. I'm sure we'll do many more punk bands, but
1986 is
you
a seminal
end
year.
1986, and you're really ending this era of like this experimental punk. And then Henry Rollins goes on to do the Rollins Band, and he's still, like, I think he was in Nashville a few months ago doing spoken word. So he's still, so he's done, and he's appeared in, like, a million movies and TV shows, and he's written a memoir.
One time.
He's on, like, Comedy Central. I watched that earlier today, actually. I guess that's really it. That's Black Flag. That's it. I don't know. Did we miss anything? Should we
I don't know. We did a pretty good job.
I feel like, this is like a super long one, but there's so much to talk about.
Listen to whoever's listening to this, even if you don't like Black Flag, at least say you got to listen to it, because it matters, and look at it too. It's a band that deserves looking at. Look at all their
just
flyers and like look at what they say and look at what they did and just really dive in, because it's not a band that's there's so many moving parts, and they seem to touch almost every aspect of art. Performance art, spoken word, poetry, music, fundamentals of lifestyle, like all these kinds of things.
Yeah, so
political
if you
aspects.
like I feel like a lot of people, especially with streaming, it's easy to say I don't like a band or whatever, but like I don't know, I think it's important to analyze and understand like what art you don't like can also bring. So even if you've never gotten into Black Flag, give it a chance. I recommend just like start from the beginning and just listen to all of it, like listen to each album all the way through and sit there and like I don't know how you could not like it. It's my favorite punk band.
Just please do not tell me you don't like them because you heard a song in Urban Outfitters.
Yeah, exactly.
Or something like that.
Yeah,
Please just give it a chance.
Hopefully this podcast persuaded you to like Black Flag, and if you already liked Black Flag, I hope that you agree with a lot of this and or
maybe you learned something.
Yeah, I know I learned something doing research for this. So, yeah, that's this concludes our episode of Bandsplainer. Thank you, Zach, for joining us.
Thank you, Olivia, for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, so that is Black Flag Bandsplained. Thank you, guys.